December 16, 1985, 5:26 p.m. Sparks Steakhouse, East 46th Street, Manhattan. Paul Castellano, 70 years old, boss of the Gambino crime family, stepped out of his black Lincoln Continental. His underboss, Thomas Bellotti, was beside him. They were dressed for dinner, Castellano in a dark overcoat, Bellotti in a leather jacket. They walked toward the restaurant entrance. Four men in identical trench coats and Russian fur hats approached from the shadows. They raised semi-automatic pistols. 6 shots hit Castellano in the head and chest. He collapsed onto the sidewalk. Bellotti ran toward the shooters. They fired 8 more rounds. Bellotti fell beside his boss. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Total time, 11 seconds. The shooters walked to a waiting car and drove away. Across the street, sitting in a black Buick, John Gotti watched the entire execution. Then he drove past the bodies to confirm the kill. This was the most brazen mob hit in New York history. And for the next 7 years, nobody could touch John Gotti. 3 murder trials, 3 acquittals. A 4th trial ended in a hung jury. The press called him the Teflon Don because nothing stuck. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Gotti didn't beat those cases because he was smart. He beat them because he corrupted the system. Witness intimidation, jury tampering, bribing cops. And the moment that system failed him, the moment one man decided to break the code, Gotti's empire collapsed in 72 hours. This is the story of how John Gotti became untouchable and how a jacket button destroyed him. From the Castellano hit to the Rave Night Social Club, from Sammy the Bull's betrayal to the surveillance tapes that captured everything. This isn't the charismatic gangster the media sold you. This is the real John Gotti, a killer who thought he was above the law until the law proved him catastrophically wrong. But here's what nobody tells you. Gotti's downfall didn't start with Sammy Gravano's testimony. It started the moment he put on that $2,000 double-breasted suit and decided to become famous. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was born October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx, New York. His father was a day laborer who struggled to find steady work. His mother raised 13 children in a 3-bedroom apartment. The family moved constantly, Bronx to Brooklyn to Queens, always one step ahead of eviction notices. Gotti grew up in East New York, one of the poorest, most violent neighborhoods in Brooklyn. By age 12, he was running with street gangs. By age 14, he'd been arrested for the first time, burglary. By age 16, he dropped out of school permanently. But Gotti had something most street kids didn't have: charisma. He was good-looking, sharp-dressed, even when he had no money, and he had a way of making people want to follow him. He formed a crew of neighborhood kids: Angelo Ruggiero, Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson, and the Fatico brothers. They ran hijacking operations, stealing trucks at JFK Airport, and fencing the goods through mob-connected warehouses. In 1957, Gotti, 17 years old, met Carmine Fatico, a capo in the Gambino crime family. Fatico ran operations out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens. Fatico saw potential in Gotti. He was tough, loyal, and most importantly, he didn't ask questions. Fatico brought Gotti into the organization as an associate. You have to understand what this meant. The Gambino family in the 1950s was the most powerful crime organization in America. They controlled the docks, the construction unions, the garment district, and gambling operations across New York. Getting brought in by a Gambino capo was like getting recruited by the Yankees. You'd made it. Gotti worked his way up through hijacking. Between 1957 and 1968, he and his crew hijacked an estimated 200 trucks. Electronics, cigarettes, clothing, whiskey, anything that could be fenced. Gotti's cut was 30%. Fatico took 40%. The bosses took the rest. Gotti earned between $50,000 and $100,000 a year from hijacking alone. For a kid from East New York who'd grown up with nothing, this felt like royalty. But Gotti wanted more than money. He wanted respect. He wanted to be made. In 1968, Gotti got his chance. The FBI estimates he participated in his first murder that year. The victim's name was never confirmed, but the body was buried under wet concrete at a construction site in Queens. Gotti never talked about that murder, but people in the crew noticed a change. He was colder, more calculating. In 1973, Gotti was involved in the murder of James McBratney. McBratney was an Irish gang member who'd kidnapped and killed Carlo Gambino's nephew in a botched ransom scheme. Carlo Gambino, the boss of the Gambino family, wanted revenge. Gotti volunteered. On May 22, 1973, Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and Ralph Gallione walked into Snoop's Bar and Grill on Staten Island. McBratney was sitting at the bar. Gotti flashed a fake police badge and told McBratney he was under arrest. McBratney resisted. Gotti pulled a gun and shot him 3 times in the chest. The hit was sloppy. Witnesses saw everything. Police arrested Gotti within 48 hours. But here's where Gotti learned the most important lesson of his criminal life. The Gambino family took care of him. They hired Roy Cohn, one of the most powerful defense attorneys in New York, to represent Gotti. Cohn negotiated a plea deal. Gotti pled guilty to attempted manslaughter. He served less than 2 years. When Gotti walked out of prison in 1977, Carlo Gambino made him a formal member of the Gambino crime family. Gotti was now a made man. Being made meant institutional protection. Made members couldn't be killed without permission from the boss. They earned a percentage of every criminal operation in their crew. They had power, respect, and immunity from outsiders. Gotti took over operations at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. He ran hijacking, loan sharking, bookmaking, and labor racketeering. His crew included Angelo Ruggiero, John Gotti, his brother, John Carneglia, and Wilfred Johnson. They earned an estimated $2 million a year. Gotti's cut was $400,000 annually. He spent it on clothes, cars, and gambling. He became known for his tailored suits, his slicked-back hair, and his public persona. He wasn't hiding. He was performing. But while Gotti was building his reputation, the Gambino family was changing. Carlo Gambino died of natural causes in 1976. His successor, Paul Castellano, was everything Gotti wasn't. Castellano was quiet, business-focused, and he hated drugs. He forbade Gambino family members from dealing narcotics. Anyone caught dealing would be killed. Gotti didn't care. In the early 1980s, Angelo Ruggiero, Gotti's best friend, was running a massive heroin operation out of Queens. The FBI was listening. They'd planted bugs in Ruggiero's house. For 2 years, the FBI recorded Ruggiero discussing drug deals, murder contracts, and Gambino family business. In 1983, the FBI arrested Ruggiero and John Gotti on federal drug trafficking charges. The indictment included transcripts from the FBI bugs. Those transcripts mentioned Paul Castellano. They mentioned murders. They mentioned internal Gambino family politics. Castellano demanded to see the tapes. He wanted to know what Ruggiero had said. Ruggiero refused. He knew if Castellano heard the tapes, he'd be killed for dealing drugs. Gotti was caught in the middle. Castellano was his boss. Ruggiero was his best friend. Castellano gave Gotti an ultimatum. Hand over the tapes, or Ruggiero dies. Gotti stalled. He lied for months. But Castellano was losing patience. By 1985, Castellano had another problem. He was facing federal racketeering charges, the commission trial, where prosecutors were targeting the bosses of all 5 New York crime families. Castellano knew he was going to prison, and he knew once he was locked up, the captains would move against him. Gotti saw an opportunity. By late 1985, Paul Castellano was the most hated boss in Gambino family history. The younger captains, John Gotti, Sammy Gravano, Frank DeCicco, thought Castellano was weak. He'd distanced himself from traditional mob operations. He'd moved to a mansion on Staten Island. He refused to meet with soldiers. Worse, Castellano had ordered the murders of several Gambino members without consulting the captains. The captains feared they'd be next. Gotti started holding secret meetings. He argued that Castellano had violated the rules. He'd ordered unsanctioned killings. He'd disrespected the family. He had to go. But killing a sitting boss required permission from the commission, the council of bosses from the 5 New York families. Gotti didn't ask for permission. He decided to act first and deal with consequences later. On December 16, 1985, Gotti assembled a hit team. The shooters were Gambino soldiers, John Carneglia, Eddie Lino, Salvatore Scala, and Vincent Artuso. Sammy Gravano organized logistics. Frank DeCicco confirmed Castellano's dinner reservation at Sparks Steakhouse. Here's how it went down. At 5:26 p.m., Castellano's black Lincoln pulled up to Sparks. Castellano stepped out first. His driver and underboss, Thomas Bellotti, got out on the passenger side. They were 30 feet from the restaurant entrance. Four men in identical Russian fur hats and trench coats approached. They pulled out semi-automatic pistols. John Carneglia fired first. 6 shots hit Castellano, 3 in the head, 3 in the chest. Castellano collapsed immediately. Bellotti saw the shooters and ran toward them. Eddie Lino fired 8 rounds. Bellotti fell beside Castellano's body. The entire hit took 11 seconds. Across the street, John Gotti sat in a black Buick with Sammy Gravano. Gotti watched the shooters walk away. Then he drove past Castellano's body to confirm the kill. Within hours, word spread through the Gambino family. Paul Castellano was dead. Thomas Bellotti was dead. Nobody knew who'd ordered the hit, but everybody suspected Gotti. 2 weeks later, Gotti called a meeting at the Rave Night Social Club in Little Italy. He summoned every Gambino captain. When they arrived, Gotti was sitting in Castellano's chair. He didn't ask if anyone objected. He just told them how things would work. Gotti was boss. Sammy Gravano was underboss. Frank DeChico was consigliere. Nobody left. Gotti had just become boss of the most powerful crime family in America. And he'd done it without permission from the commission. You have to understand what this meant. Killing a boss without commission approval was a death sentence. The other families were supposed to retaliate, but they didn't. Because Castellano was already under indictment. Because the other bosses were also facing federal charges. They didn't have the resources to start a war. So Gotti got away with it. For now. Between 1986 and 1990, John Gotti became the most famous gangster in America. The media loved him. He dressed in $2,000 Brioni suits. He held court at the Rave Night Social Club. He walked through Little Italy like a celebrity. Photographers followed him. Reporters asked for quotes. Gotti gave them. The FBI hated it. They'd been investigating Gotti since the Sparks hit. They had surveillance. They had informants. They had wiretaps. But they couldn't make a case stick. Here's why. Gotti had perfected jury tampering and witness intimidation. Trial number 1, the 1986 assault case. In 1986, Gotti was indicted for assault. The victim was Romuald Pisek, a refrigerator repairman who claimed Gotti and Frank Coletta had attacked him in Queens, beating him and stealing $325 from his wallet. Pisek identified Gotti in a lineup. He agreed to testify. But before the trial started, Pisek received visits. Men in dark cars parked outside his house. His wife was followed to the grocery store. Someone left a dead rat on his doorstep. Pisek got the message. At trial, Pisek took the stand. The prosecutor asked if he could identify his attackers. Pisek looked at Gotti. Then he said he couldn't remember. The case was dismissed. Gotti walked out of the courthouse, smiling. Reporters asked how he beat the charges. Gotti said, "I guess he forgot." Trial number 2, the 1987 RICO case. In 1987, federal prosecutors indicted Gotti on racketeering charges. The indictment included evidence of loan sharking, illegal gambling, and murder conspiracy. The key witness was Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson, Gotti's childhood friend. Johnson had been an FBI informant since 1966. He'd given the FBI information on Gotti's crew for 20 years. But Johnson refused to testify in open court. He feared retaliation. Without Johnson's testimony, the prosecution's case fell apart. The jury deliberated for 7 days. On March 13, 1987, they returned a verdict. Not guilty on all counts. Gotti walked. But here's what the jury didn't know. Gotti had gotten to them. One of the jurors, George Pape, was a friend of a Gambino associate. Pape had been paid $60,000 to vote not guilty and convince other jurors to acquit. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The FBI suspected jury tampering. They investigated Pape, but they couldn't prove anything until years later. Trial number 3, the 1990 assault and conspiracy case. In 1990, Gotti and Sammy Gravano were indicted for ordering the assault of John O'Connor, a union official who'd vandalized a Gambino-controlled restaurant. The indictment also included conspiracy charges related to the Castellano murder. The prosecution had strong evidence, surveillance photos, witness testimony, financial records. But Gotti's defense attorney, Bruce Cutler, attacked every witness. He accused them of lying. He accused the FBI of planting evidence. The jury deliberated for 13 hours. Not guilty on all counts. The New York Post ran a headline, "I for Gotti. Trial number 4, the 1991 mistrial." In early 1991, prosecutors tried again. They indicted Gotti on new racketeering charges. This time, they had better evidence. Wiretaps from the Rave Night Social Club where Gotti and his captains discussed criminal operations. But Bruce Cutler used the same strategy. Attack the witnesses. Discredit the FBI. The trial ended in a hung jury. Gotti walked for the 4th time. The press called him the Teflon Don. Nothing stuck. Prosecutors were humiliated. The FBI was furious. But here's what nobody knew. While Gotti was celebrating his 4th victory, the FBI had been recording him. Not at the Rave Night Social Club. In an apartment directly above it. And those tapes were about to destroy him. You have to understand how the FBI finally got Gotti. They couldn't bug the Rave Night Social Club directly. Gotti swept for listening devices constantly. So in 1989, the FBI rented an apartment on the 2nd floor of the building next door at 247 Mulberry Street. They drilled a hole through the wall and inserted a microphone into the ceiling of the Ravenites' upstairs apartment, a private room where Gotti held meetings. For 2 years, the FBI recorded everything. Gotti discussing murders. Gotti ordering hits. Gotti planning criminal operations. Gotti criticizing Sammy Gravano. That last part was the mistake that cost him everything. Sammy the Bull Gravano was Gotti's underboss. He'd been with Gotti since the Castellano hit. He'd helped organize the Sparks Steakhouse murder. He'd testified falsely in Gotti's previous trials. He'd earned millions for the Gambino family. But by 1990, Gravano was growing resentful. Gotti was treating him like an errand boy. Gotti was taking credit for Gravano's work. Gotti was publicly humiliating him. And then Gravano heard the tapes. In November 1990, the FBI arrested both Gotti and Gravano on new federal racketeering charges. The indictment included 5 murders: Paul Castellano, Thomas Bellotti, Robert DiBernardo, Liborio Melito, and Louis Di Bono. The FBI had the surveillance tapes. They had Gotti's voice discussing these murders. They had Gotti admitting to ordering the Castellano hit. But they also had something else on those tapes. They had Gotti criticizing Gravano. Gotti complained that Gravano was greedy. That Gravano couldn't be trusted. That Gravano talked too much. FBI agents played those tapes for Gravano during interrogation. Gravano realized the truth. Gotti was setting him up. If Gotti went to trial and needed a scapegoat, Gravano would be it. Gotti would testify that Gravano had acted alone. That Gravano had ordered the murders without permission. That Gravano was the real killer. Gravano had a choice: go to trial and face life in prison while Gotti blamed him for everything, or cooperate with the FBI. On November 8, 1991, Sammy Gravano made a deal. He agreed to plead guilty to racketeering. In exchange, he'd testify against Gotti. He'd admit to participating in 19 murders. He'd give prosecutors everything they needed to convict Gotti. This was the biggest betrayal in Mafia history. An underboss testifying against his boss. It had never happened before at this level. But here's the detail that actually convicted Gotti. The detail nobody talks about. It wasn't just Gravano's testimony. It was a jacket button. During the Sparks Steakhouse hit, one of the shooters, John Carneglia, lost a button from his coat during the struggle with Thomas Bellotti. The button was found at the crime scene. The FBI photographed it and stored it as evidence. 7 years later, during Gotti's 1992 trial, the FBI forensics team analyzed the button. They matched it to a custom coat made by a tailor in Little Italy, a tailor who kept detailed records of every garment he'd made. The records showed that John Carneglia had ordered that exact coat in November 1985, 1 month before the Castellano hit. The button placed Carneglia at the scene. Gravano's testimony placed Gotti as the mastermind. The surveillance tapes confirmed Gotti's involvement. The jury had everything they needed. The trial of John Gotti began on January 21, 1992, in Brooklyn Federal Court. The lead prosecutor was John Gleason. The judge was Leo Glasser. Gotti's new attorney was Albert Krieger. Bruce Cutler had been disqualified for conflict of interest. The prosecution's case was devastating. They played the surveillance tapes. On those tapes, Gotti's voice was unmistakable. Discussing the Castellano murder, "We got Big Paul out of the way. Tommy Bellotti too. Now nobody can stop us." Discussing Robert DiBernardo's murder, "Robbie had to go. He knew too much about the Castellano thing." discussing why murders were necessary. You don't ask questions. You don't hesitate. You do what needs to be done. The tapes alone were damning. But then Sammy Gravano took the stand. Gravano testified for 9 days. He described in detail how Gotti planned the Castellano hit, how Gotti assembled the hit team, how Gotti drove past the bodies to confirm the kills, how Gotti took over the family immediately afterward. Gravano admitted to his own role in 19 murders. He described how murders were sanctioned, how they were carried out, how bodies were disposed of. He spoke in a flat, matter-of-fact tone, like he was describing a business transaction. The jury was horrified, but the defense had no answer. Krieger tried to discredit Gravano. He pointed out that Gravano was an admitted murderer, that he'd made a deal to save himself, that he was lying to avoid life in prison. Gravano didn't flinch. He said, "Everything I'm saying is the truth. John Gotti ordered these murders. I helped carry them out. That's what happened." Then the prosecution presented the jacket button. They showed the jury the button found at Sparks Steakhouse. They showed the tailor's records proving it belonged to John Carneglia. They showed surveillance photos of Carneglia wearing that coat weeks before the murder. They connected the button to the murder to Carneglia, Carneglia to Gotti. The jury deliberated for 13 hours. On April 2, 1992, they returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts. 13 counts of racketeering. 5 counts of murder. Conspiracy. Obstruction of justice. Jury tampering. Guilty. John Gotti, 51 years old, showed no emotion. He sat perfectly still. Then he looked at Sammy Gravano in the witness section. Gravano looked away. On June 23, 1992, Judge Glasser sentenced Gotti to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gotti was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, a supermax facility designed for the most dangerous criminals in America. He was placed in solitary confinement. 23 hours a day in a cell. 1 hour of recreation in a concrete yard. No contact with other prisoners. No phone calls. No visitors except his lawyers. Gotti spent the next 10 years in that cell. In 1998, Gotti was diagnosed with throat cancer. He refused treatment. The cancer spread to his neck and lungs. By 2002, he was dying. The Gotti family requested compassionate release. They asked the government to let Gotti die at home. The government refused. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died in his prison cell at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He was 61 years old. His funeral was held at St. John's Cemetery in Queens. Hundreds of people attended. News cameras filmed everything. But no active Gambino family members showed up. Gotti had become a liability. The family had moved on. Here's what happened to the key players. Sammy "the Bull" Gravano served 5 years in federal prison. He was released in 1995 and entered witness protection. But Gravano couldn't stay out of trouble. In 2000, he was arrested in Arizona for running an ecstasy ring. He was convicted and sentenced to 19 years. He was released in 2017. He now runs a podcast. John Carneglia, the shooter whose jacket button helped convict Gotti, was convicted of racketeering and murder in 2009. He's serving life in prison. Bruce Cutler, Gotti's original defense attorney, was disbarred in 2005 for professional misconduct. And the Gambino crime family? It never recovered. After Gotti's conviction, the family fractured. Informants gutted the organization. The FBI arrested over 100 Gambino members between 1992 and 2000. Today, the Gambino family still exists, but it's a shadow of what it was under Gotti. Here's the real lesson of John Gotti. He didn't lose because he was unlucky. He lost because he violated the fundamental rule of organized crime. Don't draw attention. Gotti wanted to be famous. He wanted the suits, the press coverage, the celebrity treatment. He wanted to prove he was smarter than the FBI. He beat 4 trials. He corrupted juries. He intimidated witnesses. And he thought that made him untouchable. But fame made him a target. The FBI dedicated unlimited resources to taking him down. They spent years building the perfect case. They planted bugs. They flipped his underboss. They found a jacket button. And once they had him, they never let go. Gotti spent the last 10 years of his life in a concrete box. No power. No respect. No family around him. Just dying alone in a federal prison, 800 miles from the streets where he'd once been king. That's the real story of the Teflon Don. not the invincible gangster the media sold you. The killer who got famous, got arrogant, and got destroyed by the one thing he couldn't control, his own ego. If you found this story revealing, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment. Did Sammy Gravano do the right thing by cooperating? Or was he the ultimate rat? Let us know. This is Mafia Talks. Untold stories from the world of organized crime. Until next time.